Okay, well, welcome everyone. Nice to see you back again. And as I said, we're not in our usual location, so I'm hoping that everything I do today isn't going to screw anything up for us. So we'll carry on. But we are here to unpack energy, and that's a big one for some, but not so much for kindergarten and grade 1, as I think you'll find out. But we're glad that you could join us today. That's awesome. And as always, my name is Chris Arski. I'm with the CARP Consortia, and I have a super duper wonderful partner who is the brains behind so much of what you're going to see today. And Ted, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ted Zeroni. I'm with the Edmonton Regional Learning Consortium, ERLC, and I'm speaking to you today from Sherwood Park. Welcome. It's good to see everyone again.
Okay. So I'll let you take it away, Ted.
Thanks, Chris. I'd like to begin, as I always do, with the land acknowledgement or acknowledgement of landed people. But before I read through ours, I think there's some things that Elder Stephen Paquette has to say about land acknowledgements that I think maybe resonate well with us, so that when we do read our land acknowledgement and other land acknowledgements, we also think of some other things that Stephen brings to mind for us. So, Chris, if you could just begin by playing that video.
Let me know if you can't hear it.
It's good.
Okay.
What I've learned from my elders is that when we do acknowledgement of the land, it's not about acknowledging whose land it belongs to. Because that Indigenous worldview, we never owned the land. We're simply caretakers of it for future generations. And what I've been taught from my elders is that when we do that acknowledgement of the land, it's much more than just the territory. It's about relationships. It's about our relationships with people that share the land. It's our relationships with Mother Earth. It's our relationships with the four-legged, the finned, the feathered, the crawlers, the original stewards of Mother Earth. It's that relationship that we acknowledge with the trees. It's that acknowledgement that we have with the plant life that is part of the food chain and helps us exist. It gives us our medicines for healing, gives us food for nutrients. It gives us our medicines for ceremonies. We acknowledge water. Water is sacred. Water is life. And what we're told is that when we acknowledge that water, that we always have to acknowledge the carriers of those teachings, which are the woman. So we do that in the same voice. We also acknowledge the infinite wisdom of the grandfathers. Then we take that to the next level, is which acknowledging that relationship that we have with father-son, or in some nations, brother-son. We acknowledge that relationship that we have with Nokomis, Grandma Moon, and how she cleanses Mother Earth. We acknowledge that relationship that we have with our distant relations, the star people. So when we talk about acknowledging the land, it's so much more so than just acknowledging what nation was on that. As we know all throughout the history of Turtle Island, is that Indigenous people were, for the most part, nomadic people. They shifted. They would move from season to season. It just so happens that Sheridan sits on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, which I'm very proud to always share and educate with people. But in the same breath, I also acknowledge that many, many other nations have walked this territory, and that their ancestors are still here amongst us.
So as I read through the acknowledgement here, I would hope that you may want to just spend time thinking about some of those relationships that do make up all that is part of not only Treaty 6 territory, but the land on which we walk in general. So in the spirit of reconciliation, I want to acknowledge that this is the gathering, and this gathering is taking place on traditional lands across the province of Alberta, home to many diverse nations, Métis and Inuit peoples. We acknowledge that this land is a traditional meeting ground, and giving voice to its original peoples and the story of creation of this country in a way that history has forgotten. And with that, I'd like to begin. This is the last of the sessions, I believe, for K to 3 is the energy one, and we hope that by the time you're done this final one, that you continue to gain confidence in unpacking and teaching the new curriculum, especially next year during implementation, that you're given a bit more direction and know where you're going with it and what you need to get done, and that you walk away feeling you've got it, that you can handle this, and you know what you've got the direction, and you know you have the abilities to move the curriculum forward, and knowing that Chris and I are always around to ask questions if you do have any along the way. I should add that we are going to be having some implementation sessions, Chris, is that correct? So we'll let you know when those are coming out at a later date.
And maybe for those as well, just to clarify that it'll be implementation, because there are going to be lots of people who have not started as you have. So we will be leaving the resources that you have received and been part of up, but we're also going to add a little bit into that. So there'll be additions to it, right? So just so that you know to check on those pieces.
Right. So in order to help build that confidence, direction, and efficacy, here's what we have planned today. A very similar beginning. It's difficult to change up the front end because we never know who will be repeat participants and who are new participants, because not everybody has been piloting the entire course. Some have just been piloting certain organizing ideas, and some have been able to make it to one session or none sessions. So we always want to make sure we meet everybody's needs. So the front end is going to be similar to what you've heard in the past, but there are some change up to it and some new additional perspectives that maybe will clarify things at the front end for you that maybe might enlighten you in that way. So we'll take a closer look at the cusps in terms of the knowledge and understanding and skills and procedures, and a brief look at some instructional considerations and assessment consideration. And then Chris is going to, as usual, take us through the second half of the journey and provide a whole range of examples and resources that we can use and walk away from as soon as we get them posted, which will be tomorrow. So our organizing idea is energy, and as we know, it's a broad understanding that goes across all grades. Energy goes from K to 6 with the new curriculum. In particular, what we're looking at energy at grade 1 is how the movement of objects can be understood. Kindergarten focused more on the movement of people and animals, and this is looking at objects and the way they can move around. So students in this organizing idea investigate the direction, pathway, and speed of the moving objects as we move forward. On the next slide is just a really quick review of the outcomes in general. And as we've mentioned before, this curriculum is quite different than the old curriculum in that it's not separate chunks or separate units of knowledge and skills that are taught in one grade, and then the next grade teacher begins afresh with a whole new subject and a whole new series of learnings. As you look at across the learning outcomes from K to 3, and there's another slide from K to 6 that you can look at later if you wish, but you can see the transition and the progression of the organizing ideas from grade to grade. So for example, in kindergarten for grade 1, children were examining the properties in energy, children were exploring the movement of animals, human and objects, mainly of animals and humans. Now we get to grade 1, we get a little bit more specific with objects and more specifically with pathways and speed and direction moving. When we get to grade 2, we're looking at movement as well, but more specifically with light and sound. And when we get to grade 3, we're looking at how forces can affect movement of objects. You can see that there's a continuation of ideas and concepts, and they move throughout the grades. So as you begin grade 1, there are some concepts that students in kindergarten will have learned. So you may have to do some back teaching as you teach this unit, and you'll see those as we move along through the unit. Chris, if you just want to click on that link I have on the top right, and you'll have access to all this material. Just again, to help you with the progressions and maybe see where things are going. Oh, that's the wrong one. Never mind. That's the link to that same thing. Forget it. Okay. So once you get the slide deck, you can click that link and away we go. You can just skip out the first slide. It does go through grade 4 to 6, and we won't go through that, but you'll take a look at it on your own. I always like to begin with this a slide here that talks a little about where we are, where we're going, what we're at. And it's because the more and more we're paying attention to things like AI, artificial intelligence, the tensions around the world, and we're just hearing more and more of things that are happening around the world that are changing our world so quickly and so dramatically. And we always have to wonder what's going to be next. And to help, I think, maybe make that how our world is changing and in ways that are incredible and scary in one way, but incredible in another. If you just play this short little 30-second video clip, it's a picture, there's a clip of a robot riding a bike. So it's riding it all on its own. Look at the balance and things like that. It's incredible.
That is so cool.
And that's just that's an old robot and it's been around for a while. And so we know that there's a lot of things changing in our world. So the question always becomes, well, where are we at with education? What do we do? How do we get our kids ready for what the future holds for them? And I keep coming back to the same word every session. You probably know what that next word is, and that's transfer. And when you think about it, that probably is our collective goal, is to help kids transfer what we teach them, what they learn in our classrooms, to the next grade, so they can carry those understandings and those skills to the grades afterwards, but more importantly, to their lives when they leave our school and become contributing citizens in our communities. So we have to teach in a way that's going to allow for transfer, that focuses on those things that really are important, that kids can take and hone and move on, so they become prepared and ready to accept the challenges and enjoy the benefits of the future as whole. I say benefits, I'm an eternal optimistic. There's lots of things that maybe seem a little bit spooky, but I think we as educators can play a huge role, and I'm optimistic in that way that our teachers just have a love of kids, and we're going to move forward this together. We've got a lot on our plates, but I think we can do this. So what does transfer? We know that skills transfer. And some of them are the hard skills, such as critical thinking is represented by the books, such as critical thinking, as I mentioned, comparing, contrasting, evaluating, all those kinds of things. But other skills transfer, the skills for collaboration, empathizing is a skill, it transfers, listening, and all those other things that we know are so important to work together and to be contributing citizens in our communities. So those things transfer, but other things do transfer beside the skills. Concepts do transfer. So we can see in this picture, we can take a look at empathy. We could see that in this picture, but we can transfer in another concept, inequity. Do we see curiosity here? Compassion, poverty, and so on. So just individual concepts transfer, but other things transfer as well. And those are understandings. For example, here are two understandings out of the grade 1 curriculum, one from the energy unit and one from the matter unit. That movement occurs in different directions. If we were there watching this man sanding this piece of wood, would we be able to see that? Is that hold true? Is that understanding hold true? Does this context hold true that some properties of objects can be physically changed? So our understandings can also go from place to place and place with us. So we can get these kids to have the skills, of the specific concepts, the understandings and the knowledge. Those are the things that transfer. So we don't just teach with a checklist box, but we keep in mind, how can we get kids to have this part of what they know and what they learn and take with them from grade to grade. So the knowledge does include those things like facts, principles, concepts. The bulk of the stuff in this curriculum are concepts. We're going to focus on that. I'm going to include the definition for understanding because it's the one that's, I think, a little bit more evasive and a little bit ambiguous to understand, but we'll take a closer look at it. But I'd just like to share the definition of how facts and knowledge fit together in a logical and meaningful order, how that all fits together. And we, of course, know that skills and procedures are what students do, but they do them to demonstrate their knowledge the left-hand column, and to demonstrate their understanding, that center column. So they're doing something, and that's what we'll take a look at here shortly as well. Next slide, please. So let's begin with concepts, because that is the sort of the groundwork. You've heard this before if you've been with my presentations in the past, so you're here again. I've got some different concepts here. A concept is an organizing idea of one or two words with distinct attributes. So they're shared across multiple examples. So a chair is a concept because it has, we may look at it and say, well, it's got four legs, it's got a seat, it's got a back, and it's a piece of furniture made for sitting. And a chair is different than the next item of furniture on the next slide, which is a stool. Now it's also a piece of furniture that's made for sitting. And it's got four legs as well, but we call it a stool because it seems to be missing something, and that something is that a critical attribute of the back. So that's really what a concept is. It's an idea that has a definition and it's got examples that we can pull from different contexts. And that's how we see a concept as transferable. We got all kinds of different examples from all kinds of contexts. So even though the right-hand side, we've got the piece of furniture sitting in the grass, the distinctive things make the chair and the stool a stool, no matter where it is. Next slide. It's important to keep in mind that concepts range from broad to specific. You don't have to say, well, this is a broad one or a specific one. But when you start looking at them, seeing them, you'll see that there are broader ones and more specific ones. The broader ones are more transferable. Energy is something we could look at in science. We could look at energy in phys ed. We could look at energy in health and wellness when it comes to food. So that idea can transfer quite easily from subject to subject and across many disciplines. Same with movements, is a little bit more specific of part of energy, but we can see that also transferring to other things as well. And we start getting down to things like speed and pathways and so on. We keep going down more specific and more specific with our concepts. And the more we do that, the more discipline or subject specific those concepts become. And the deeper we go with understanding those concepts, the deeper our understanding of the subject area. So if you can imagine, we keep on adding concepts underneath speed and take a look at what's that relation with velocity and change and so on. We keep building it and building a deeper understanding of movement from a scientific perspective with the more concepts we add on. Next slide. And as we mentioned, the concepts are transferable. We see courage. Can we see courage in both of these? We see independence in both of these different contexts. Once again, transferring means I can see something in different contexts and it moves from place to place. People may argue there is no courage in image one, but some people may argue there is. So let's use the concepts as our lens. And that's the neat thing about concepts, because they are transferable. We can use it as a lens to focus in and see certain things. So conceptual lens, you don't have to move back, Chris. And the previous photo was courage. We would look for how can we see courage in those photos. So I'm going to use the conceptual lens of concepts so we can take a look at our organizing idea through that lens. As per usual, I do have a slide like this. Those of you who've been with me already, I've got some of the cusps, some of the knowledge, understanding, and skills and procedures statements, along with the guiding question and learning outcome. And if you look at it carefully, you'll probably see some of those things that are ideas pop out at you. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see that some of the key concepts that are highlighted are ones that we look at in the course. Movement is a concept, and an object is. Pathway is a concept, as is animal and object. You'll notice I have some in brackets. That's because they're related to a verb, and the verb is not the concept, but what the verb produces is a concept. So when you investigate, you create an investigation, and an investigation has a certain set of a certain definition and certain qualities of what makes an investigation an investigation. Same with the description. Not everything we hear or see written about something is the description, but some qualities about it, a description that make it so. And to create a description, we do the action, we describe something. And same with recording something. So when we observe, describe, and record, we're creating a record. So what is a record? it's a concept as well. So you'll see many concepts throughout the entire, all the organizing ideas, but you want to spend more time, and you'll see the curriculum spending more time on some of those key or anchoring concepts. And the ones particular for this organizing idea in grade 1 are movement. And movement happens in a pathway, speed, and a direction. There are factors that affect movement, and movements have different ways of moving as well. And object is another thing that shows up. It was introduced in grade 1 and continues on through the grades. Next slide, please. So the concepts are all in that knowledge column. In this particular case, we see a movement pathway has a definition there. And the movement pathway is the path an object or animal follows when it moves. Now, you notice there is no definition for object, and in many cases, you'll find there is no definition for a concept. And that's because, number one, there is not one, or number two, it's identified in a different organizing idea, or number three, it's in a different grade curriculum. In this particular case, object is defined in kindergarten, actually, in the matter organizing idea as anything that can be perceived using the senses. And the whole thing of senses becomes important because it does show up in grade 1. And to understand that, you may have to revisit that with the kids. So that's one of those back teaching things you may have to do. So the concept definitions are there, but we know that concepts don't only have definitions, they have examples that accompany them. And the knowledge column of the curriculum does that as well. We can go to the next slide here. In this particular portion of the organizing idea, in the knowledge section, movement pathways exemplars are given. So a pathway can be straight, curved, spiral from side to side, and so on. If there are no examples, they'll need to be generated by the teacher, or if you have the activity, you might want to find some that have examples already generated. So that's our knowledge section of the cusps. Oh, just maybe an additional thing you may find interesting. If you just click on that link very quickly, Chris, what we have here is a similar chart to what I had before, but it's got the specific or anchoring or key concepts in it. So in this particular case, you could see the organizing idea of matter. It's got that you could see the progression of the guiding questions, the progression of the learning outcome, like we saw in the previous slide. But then you can also see the progression of some of the key concepts. So for example, description is important in kindergarten. Description also shows up quite a bit in grade 1, as you probably noticed. Things like properties are important. They show up throughout the grades as well. So you can see which are the big key ideas as you look along. And I was looking at matter, I'm sorry, but there's the energy one. So movement is sort of certainly a big one. Observation is another big one that shows up. Object. Speed and direction show up mainly in grade 3, but things like object and movement are very important concepts that keep on transferring down the road. So this does the progression for all the grades. So you may want to take a look at that and peruse through it later, or have it handy later when you decide what are the key concepts you want to make sure to focus on. And taking those concepts, you can relate them to each other to get a different kind of an understanding what it is. So as per each unit, we've taken all the not only ideas but pieces of knowledge and put them together in this map to help understand what's really in this organizing idea. And this organizing idea, it really takes a look at movement and its different aspects, and it keeps on. If you take a look at the skills and procedure, saying that these are the aspects that can be described or observed. So what are the aspects that can always be described and observed? They are direction, and there's all kinds of different directions there. Another aspect is different pathways, which can be described or observed, different speeds that can be described and observed, ways of moving, and finally, there are factors that affect the movement of objects. And those are the things that they're basically covered in this organizing idea, grade 1. Let's just quickly look through into understandings and get a better understanding of what understandings are. We can go to the next slide, please.
All right.
No, that's all right.
thought it went.
I'm just throwing the definition from the guiding framework in there again, because it's one that I haven't brought up before, but I think it kind of really helps to understand why understandings are there in that middle column. Again, they're how the facts and the knowledge fit together in a logical and meaningful order. So let's just take a look at how we can sort of, or maybe make that less ambiguous. And we go to the next slide. We know that in the knowledge column, that's where the facts and the concepts are. So variety is a concept that shows up. Movement is a concept that shows up in the knowledge column, and objects that show up. And individually, students will know what variety means, they'll know what movement means, and they know what objects mean. All right. Individually, they mean something, but if we put them together, it creates a different something more than just the individual definitions of each of those concepts. So we look at the first statement: a variety of objects, it should read objects, not object. A variety of objects have movement. Maybe not all of them, but a variety of them do. There are some that have movement, some maybe that don't, or not. Or we can organize those same concepts in a different way to get a totally different understanding. Movement of objects occurs in a variety of ways. So same concepts strung together differently, two different separate understandings. And if you go to the next slide, Chris. So that's why the definition fits in. It's how the facts and knowledge fit together in a logical and meaningful order. You can see now those concepts are fit together in a logical and meaningful order. And that's what we want our kids to do, are take those pieces of knowledge and understand them in a logical order that also, we know, transfers from place to place. So next slide. If we could take a look at that next slide, you'll see that understanding is written right in the curriculum, which is right in cusp line number 5, and energy cusp line 5. Movement of objects occurs in a variety of ways. In this particular way, it's the rolling, bouncing, and sliding. And you can see that those same concepts show up in knowledge. In this particular case, the knowledge and understanding are written almost the exact same way. That doesn't always typically happen, but in this particular case, it does. And you could see then the skills and procedures also refers to those same understandings and concepts. Next slide. So just another graphic. Those individual concepts work together to build that understanding. And that's just another slide, another way just to provide a graphic understanding of that. So we can move on, Chris. We know that understandings themselves are transferable. So if we take a look at one of those energy understandings, that movement of objects occurs in a variety of ways, we could take a look at different contexts and transfer it. Is that understanding true in this particular photo where the arrow is pointing to the ping pong ball? I mean, kids can explain that. Is it true that objects move in a variety of ways? Or what are the different ways that a ping pong ball can move? Show me, explain that to me. Is it true that objects move in a variety of ways? Is it true in the case of a worm? Well, what is it? Show me. Tell me that you understand that in some particular way. So again, these are just transferable to all different kinds of contexts. It could be a spaceship. It could be a planet. It could be a comet. So you can see how we can just transfer that to all different kinds of contexts. And of course, the further away from the subject that you learn it in, that's where the transfer really happens. We'll talk about that later. So the summary then of all those things I just talked about is concepts have definitions and examples. The individual concepts themselves are transferable. They're deepened through the grades. They can provide a focus, and we call that a conceptual lens. They have relationships with other concepts. And when we put them in relation with other concepts, they create understandings that are also transferable. Let's take a look at the skills and procedures using that conceptual lens. You can go to the next slide, Chris. Boy, that slide shouldn't be there. I hope I gave you the right slide. So I'll refer to that slide later on. You can just go to the next slide. Okay, we are good. So we're looking at skills and procedures. We know that we use that lens to find them. It's basically the first word. It's that verb in those statements. And you want to use that lens to isolate it out. In this particular case, move seems to be the skill to do something. And the content is the objects in a variety of ways, which is part of the content. Demonstrate is the verb. And the content part, we can demonstrate a lot of things, but we're demonstrating something particular to this organizing idea, how the movement of objects can be influenced. We want to hone in on those first. So once you do that, we go to tip number 2. Ask yourself, what is the statement really asking the students to do? We can get kids to move objects in a variety of ways, but when you stop and think about it, they're doing the same thing as demonstrating something. So when students are moving objects in a variety of ways, they're demonstrating to us that they know the variety of ways objects can move. Okay. They can also demonstrate how the movement of objects can be influenced. So an alternative way perhaps to maybe interpret the first one there would be to demonstrate how objects move in a variety of ways, because that's really what it's asking to do. So that's why I put in number 2, really clarify to yourself, what is it really asking you to do? And at the end of the day, it's not so much a skill and procedure, so much as it is really you're asking them to demonstrate their understanding of concepts. You're asking them to understand the concepts of up, down, sideways, and so on. You're asking them to demonstrate their understanding of how objects can be influenced by doing whatever, by moving them or by drawing diagrams. So you show at this point, they're just demonstrating what they know and understand with these particular skills procedures. Go ahead. Tip number 3, we want to identify those main skills in the organizing idea. Some of them are pretty, they don't show up very often, and so you'll kind of do what the skills and procedure statement says perhaps, but there's some other ones that are big, that are really hold a lot of weight in the organizing idea, in the grade, and in this whole spectrum of the K to 6 curriculum. So we want to find what those are. So you get those from the organizing idea, been looking at the big ones in the course, but also don't forget there's the competencies, things like collaboration, problem solving, critical creative thinking. Those are also skills and procedures that don't necessarily show up. And when we stop and think about what it is that we want kids to walk away with when they leave our schools, many of them are the competencies. And if we don't pause and identify them as some major thing that we want to add in, we're going to miss perhaps an opportunity to really help our kids learn some of those basic skills or in the competencies, because they don't necessarily show up in the curriculum or they're not explicitly in the curriculum. So we'll go to the next slide. Here are all the skills and procedure statements. And just by looking at that, you can see there's some that jump out at you that are quite common. So we've got describe, shows up as a biggie, observe, record is one that shows up. Perform trials, I think it's the only time in the entire K to 6 curriculum that it shows up. It really means experiment though, when you think about it. So we'll take a look at that in a second. So what I'd like to do, Chris, is just go to those are the key ones in this organizing idea. Describing, observing, recording, and so on. What I've done here is you can just enlarge that. Excuse me. If you just scroll to the top so you can see that the headings. So what I've done, you've got all those verbs from K to 3. This is just K to 3. And how many times they show up in that grade. For all the organizing ideas. So for example, grade 1, a word that shows up 3 times only is identify, but identify works many times like demonstrate. They like identify, they could have used the word identify instead of demonstrate movement, identify the movement of objects. That's how the word identify is often used in the curriculum. So that's why you got to work at it quickly. Take a look. Discuss shows up quite a bit in grade 1. It doesn't show up in this particular organizing idea, but it's a huge one, and it's huge in all the other grades. It really is one of the main ones when you add in the 4 to 6 ones. So if we can break down what it is to discuss a grade 1 and start giving kids some of the basic foundations of a discussion, it's going to carry them well, because we know when they leave school, if they can be open-minded and discuss things, that's one of the things that is really going to help us move forward in the world. So we got to start now. I've highlighted the yellow ones there. Those are the ones that appear to be from K to 3 across the grades. They show up in all 4 grades. So those are ones that not just this organizing idea, but when you look ahead to next year, those seem to be some of the key foundational ones. If you scroll down, Chris, you'll see there's all kinds of other ones that just show up 1 or 2 times. And while they're important, it's just sort of like, there's got to be a way to, you can go on to the next page even. I think there's more of them. There's a ton of them, as you can see. But when you add them all together, the key ones are all there. So we'll move on. I want to just go to investigations, because a lot of these words you see, observe, or record, they show up in the computer or in the scientific investigation one. So if you take a look, I pulled out some things specifically that you may want to consider looking back to the investigations that are in this particular organizing idea. Investigating involves these 4 things: asking questions, predicting, gathering information, and then forming a conclusion. Okay. And they talk about what observations are, how they can be recorded as you scroll down at grade 1. And also, it talks about recording accurately that information. It talks about recording. It talks about making observation as well. And we look back at our skills. Those are some key ones that showed up in those skills and procedures questions. So the information in the scientific methods unit is going to help as you move forward with this organizing idea. Thanks, Chris.
Sounds like we still got a whole lot of alarms going off there.
I have, oh boy, I'm going to put mine on silent. I don't think it matters.
I think everybody, I can hear everybody's.
So those, again, are the key ones that show up: describe, observe, record. And you'll notice even in the learning outcomes, students investigate, the very first cusp is students describe and observe all those things. We'll look at that first one in a second. Discuss shows up. You may want to look at that. Investigate, you may want to look at that. And again, there's the link to the competencies, the new Learn Alberta. If you want to know, like there's, for example, there's the competencies. If you open that up, you don't have to go to now, Chris, but one of the competencies is communication. And it gives you some things that kids should do in kindergarten and by grade 1 then, both kindergarten and grade 1, when it comes to communication. And many of those things are with the discussion part when the kids discuss. So you might want to look at those, pull those out, and use those as the basis of some things to work with kids in terms of what makes a good discussion. So again, just another graphic that we've been looking at. So we'll skip that one. That maybe shouldn't have necessarily been there. So again, we want to work to make sure all these things come transfer. And how do we do that? We keep in mind Hattie Fisher-Fry, stages of learning that surface, deep, and transfer. Surface is where those individual skills and concepts are kind of focused on and taught. So if the skill is discussion, what is the discussion? Let's talk about it. What's an observation? What does it mean to observe? Let's practice doing some observations. Let's observe the playground. Let's practice this. What is a discussion? What is a description? Let's practice making some descriptions. Once kids know that, then we go to the deep learning, and that's where the understandings are examined and created. So that's why I have the triangulation of the 3 boxes. Those are 3 concepts in connection to each other. They're understanding. And then the different color beneath that understanding of the different contexts. It could be a picture, it could be a situation, it could be an event, it could be a video, it could be a story, it could be anything that will allow kids to transfer. And then transfer just means kids are doing it more independently with very different concepts. Like I said, if we're looking at observations, maybe kids or movement of things in the classroom experiments, then maybe they move to the playground and observe it there, or maybe they apply it to their PE program and talk about movement there as well. So those are ways that could all be transferred from one to the other. But then you'll have to ask them about it later, right? What did you see? Were you transferred? What kind of movement did we see in this situation, right? And that's where they keep on transferring. Does that understanding still hold true that people can move in a variety of ways? Yes, it does, because in phys ed class, here's what we saw and here's what we did. And with each stage, there's some instructional approaches. Most of mine that I have examples for you are the surface level. We're not going to go through all those. I'm just going to maybe ask you go I'll just maybe talk about them really briefly, Chris, and then I'll tell you which one to click on. So the concept attainment strategy is one that I do like only because we can often give kids a definition of something and have them practice it. If you use a concept attainment strategy, kids are thinking and they're doing a lot of those things, they're hypothesizing. You can make it a group thing, they're observing, discussing. So you could do a lot of other thinking things if you use the strategy to go along and bolster what you're doing in a classroom. And so that's why you'll see me using those a lot. You could see that they match up with a lot of the skills that were identified in the skills and procedure part. But then just as an example, Chris, I'm going to have you go to investigating maybe at the bottom. If investigating is one of the skills, we know in computer science that investigating is a procedure. And so I use this direct teaching of skills approach because it breaks things down into steps. And then we do a guided practice. So on the left is what the teacher does. And then there's an example of what I do like. So there's some planning. You define the skill to yourself. And this investigating is defined in the curriculum. It's there. And then if you're going to be investigating, what is an investigation? So there's a concept attainment lesson there for investigation so that kids know when they're investigating, what are we going to do? We're having an investigation. They know what that really means. You can click on that one really quickly, Chris. Here's what it kind of looks like. What is an investigation? And of course, concept attainment is really examples, non-examples, right? So I'm going to have you scroll down to where you can see that first picture. Okay, so here we have an example of investigation. I lost my puppy, wondered where she was. I looked around the house, I found her in my room. A non-example is we went to the mall. I was able to get this delicious ice cream cone. It was the best tasting cone ever. And maybe there'd be pictures and put on the wall kind of thing, and the stories can help the kids and maybe help remember the stories. Next example. I wasn't feeling well. I asked my parents what was wrong, and they took me to the doctor, examined me, and said I had the flu. Non-example of a little situation story is I always wanted to ride the Ferris wheel. My parents surprised me and bought me a Ferris wheel ride for my birthday. It's not an investigation. Of course, you could see that you go through examples and non-examples of investigations, and you try to get students to say, well, what is it that with the stories with the yeses? What do they have in common? And of course, what they have in common is going to end up, if you keep scrolling down, what they have in common is going to be, in a sense, the definition and the characteristics or attributes of an investigation. So once you define it, then you can give them one, based on the definition, we know which story is the investigation, number one or number two, and why. What's an investigation? How do you see the qualities of investigation in there? And next statement or next slide. And that's where you get the definition of investigation in, which is investigation is something people do to find answers to questions, right? So they're going to see that there's a question in all of them and they find an answer to the question. So that's really how that works. So if you scroll back to that investigation, it was the Word doc, Chris. You can see that I have links to different things because, so that's the concept of an investigation. And now, well, the process of investigation, there's 4 steps. The process, the procedure, there they are. So as you're planning then, step 4 says, identify the key concepts in the steps. So once you have them, well, you're going to explain those steps to the kids. What do they need to know? Well, they need to know what a question is. And they probably do by grade 1, but step 2 is make a prediction. Well, what's a prediction? So you have to pause, and I have a link there to another concept attainment lesson to help define what a prediction is. So kids, when you're moving this, are not going, well, what's a prediction again? We help to deliver that. What's an observation? Because that's where they gather and record information, which is the observation. And the final step, they form a conclusion. What's the conclusion? Before they can form one, they have to know what one is. And again, another concept attainment lesson that'll take you to that. So you've got the 4 steps, you know the concept they're going to need, but there's also some sub-skills in them. We stop and think about it. So it's a successful investigation is going to be that kids ask a good question. So what are opportunities throughout the whole science curriculum or whole grade 1 where we get kids practicing asking what good questions? What are good questions? What are the 5 basic ones? What makes a good question? What makes a lousy question? Can kids make predictions? They know one is, but they need now practice making predictions. They need practice observing. They need practice recording information. I have some charts there from grade 1 that talks about observing with the senses. And in this particular grade, there's observing with movement. So there's a chart there. You may click on the chart for movement 1. You could use either one, Chris, whatever you want, but just there to help out that in grade 1, it suggested that they use charts. You can put, you can have them be tokens or little, you can make this a big chart and you can have images of the different things that mean, like up arrows, sideways arrows, or you could use the words. So we have the 4 aspects. So when they're observing movement, they can observe the direction, pathway, speed, and ways of moving at the end of the day. And those 3 blank columns might be for 3 different objects or 3 different events, so on. It's yours to adjust whatever you want. But those kinds of things help kids observe, and it helps them record their observations. Once again, I was trying to get a bunch of little pictures that I could put on the side. I ran out of time. Just little up arrows, down arrows, wavy, curvy, and so on that they could use instead of words for grade 1. And I think I'm almost just about done everything here. So at the surface level, there's lots of things, and that's the area where we help kids really get the strong foundations to become a bit more independent with them. When we go to the deep, then that's where we work with the understanding. That's where we work with the connections of the different concepts. And I'll just maybe quickly go to another. This is where they use their skills. They have to use the skills to do something with it. So concept mapping is one of the useful ways to do that. Flow charts, asking conceptual questions. So I'll show you in a second. Just asking kids to explain their thinking. Like, why do you think so? Take an understanding. Say, in this situation, do you see this in this situation? Why? How come? How do you know? And if they can answer using those concepts, you know they've got it. Here's an example in the next slide. These are examples of conceptual questions. Does something make something bigger, smaller, or whatever the effect might be? Does this cause this? Does this cause this? And if they say yes, then you say, well, show how. Give me an example. When you can show they've connected 2 concepts or 3 concepts together, and they can show how, giving an example, that's the deep understanding now, because they can't show how without knowing what those individual concepts mean, and then in unison. Next slide. So then again, a graphic to help with that is that the knowledge moves is what makes the understanding, because they're all combined, but we use the skills and procedures to help kids demonstrate that understanding. So in this case, we want to get the understanding that movement occurs in different ways. We're going to get them to describe the direction of that. And that's going to help us to show that they understand it. If they can describe the different movements in different ways. Here's something else that could be done as well. If we go to the next slide. I've got 2 videos here. There's so this, you don't have to go to the videos, Chris. And they may or may not work at grade 1. I'm not too sure. But I think they would. So the understanding is that movement occurs in different directions. And the skills and procedures is describe the direction of movement using the appropriate vocabulary. So we can get them to do that. We can see the video and, well, how do you see the cars moving? Use the vocabulary that you taught them at the surface level, up, down, sideways. Do you see that in this video? Do you see it in here? But then you ask them the question related to the understanding. Does movement occur in different directions? How does this video show that? Oh, well, I saw people here, and when you stop here, I see people moving this way and that way and so on. So now when you ask those questions, the conceptual questions, how does this context show that you've gotten to kids' understanding? Another way to check their deep understanding is by giving them concept maps. To use grade 1, I think they could start working with concept maps. I can go to the next slide, yeah.
Oh, sorry, this is going to start.
Yeah, I know it's got those videos on there.
Yeah, there we are.
If they haven't done concept maps, grade 1 is a great time to choose. If they can do words, you put concept maps, and if they could change these words into pictures, that would be great too. But you could just start with something simple, like here, just give them those 5 little pieces of paper. We've got direction, aspect, up, towards, and movement. How can we put those together? And if they put them together in something that looks like that, well, movement has an aspect. And one of the aspects is direction. Of course, another aspect is pathway. Another aspect is speed. But I've connected this way because movement has an aspect. And one of those aspects is direction, and 2 directions are towards and up. They can, that shows a lot of understanding if kids can do that. It may start with three concepts, 3 ideas they put together, but as they get familiar with it, if they can build those larger and larger ones and explain to you why they're all connected, that shows very deep understanding, and you're ready for transfer to send them off on their own, right? And one more slide, I think, Chris, that I'll mention. There's some other ones. When we get to transfer, that's where we could do a lot of those more independent kind of things, project-based learning, some mini investigations or inquiries, a lot of the performance assessments are going to be happening at that stage and so on. Case studies, creative problem solving, a lot of things that you're already familiar with that we do in our lessons. And finally, don't forget, we do need to assess. So there's going to be lots of concepts that kids may have expected to know for grade 1, but they learned in kindergarten. Assess those main concepts. Ask kids to give examples. What does this mean? To define it. Use some of that. If they don't know, then use your instructional approaches at the surface level. Do some formative assessment to see if they have the skills and they have a solid foundation of the concepts to start putting together in the deep, and that they can then take those skills of comparing, contrasting, or describing and applying it to the deep, and then letting them off on their own to the transfer. And that's where you could do a summative assessment once they've become competent in the understanding, the skills, and the concepts themselves. And one final slide, I think. It's on the slide. I won't go through them, but to help you formulate your assessments for a formative assessment for something at the surface, or to see if they're good enough at the deep to move on to transfer, there's some characteristics that your assessment might have at those levels for those formative assessments. And I think that's it for my part. Yeah, so Chris, you're on your part now.
Okay, so this isn't, and we mentioned it to the kindergarten teachers yesterday, that it's not the longest and the biggest organizing idea that we have in all the things that we've unpacked. But I have to say, as small as it is, it's kind of an exciting one in the sense it has the potential for kids to be doing a lot of things. Depending on where you want to approach it, it would also depend on where you're located, because that'll give you some differences in what's available. So when Ted talked about also that students might need to know a little bit about what happened in kindergarten, that will be a bridging conversation that you will need to have. You can't just kind of launch into the grade 1 outcome, assuming that they know all of the terminology. The terminology from kindergarten was absolutely critical for the grade 1. So I've actually built in a few of the slides from kindergarten in here, but I would also encourage you to even go in and look at the kindergarten one, because you have access to perhaps some of the activities that I suggested in there as well. So yesterday it was really understanding movement, just what are the words that go along with it, and how do I move, and what do I use to move? But today what we want to look at is those skill concept words that we were looking at now that describe, observe. So do they have that checklist like that Ted showed you, where you can put whatever you want them to do on there? Can they check mark it off, or can they write down or draw a picture of what they saw happen? So those would be the kinds of things that we want to embed in this particular sort of unit that we're going to unpack. So I looked at the aspects of movement, and really I'm going to link them all together in one. I didn't do them necessarily separately. I would unpack them separately. And remember, this is one way to unpack this unit. This is not the end all be all, for sure not. So if you get some ideas from it, that's even great. So unpacking what direction means, and what kind of activity can you give them that they could nail in their minds? What does that mean about direction? Pathway comes from from the kindergarten. So this is the terminology piece right here that has to be bridged into the grade 1, because they don't have that background. They didn't arrive with it this year. And then speed, that'll be the exciting one. You got some of those kids who are really into certain things, even if they're into, and who isn't, video games these days. There's lots of places that they can play video games where their fingers alone can adjust the speed of an object that's moving on there, right? So what is it that, what is it the object has to do, and where do they have to go, and how do they change the speed of it? But we want to talk about that in terms of real objects that they can see and touch as well. And then how do objects move, right? We're going to look at some of those pictures. I have some suggestions of what we can do there. the influences of movement, and then I'm just going to give you an idea of maybe what you might want to use for another transfer idea. So because it's about movement and describing it, and we won't do this, although it'd be kind of humorous to see you all get up and do this. I'm just giving you 2 slide decks here. Both of these are music. The top one is that locomotion song in a children's version, okay, not the sleeky one that you would see in the adult version. But the locomotion song is a great one because they have to jump forward and they have to jump back, right? Those are terminologies that they're actually having to learn. But here's a fun way for them just to get involved in what they're about to learn. So you can just do a little song activity with them. Or you can do the one where she does some St. Patrick's Day motions with them. So again, you could use either one of those, and both of them would work very well for introducing, telling them what the terminology is that we're about to launch into, just letting them get involved in it. So when I talk about unpacking these individually, the direction one is about moving forward, moving back, side to side. And some of this is a little bit of a carryover from what we did in kindergarten. So you could grab some of the examples in there too, and some of the activities that we had. So directional is, can they name it? And can they just stand up in front? Can you stand, can Tracy stand? Tracy, can you go and stand in front of Farah? Tracy, can you stand behind? Can you stand beside, right? So do we know all of our terminology? Can they describe it if they see things on their desk? What is beside, in front of, behind, those types of things. So it's very much, can they see, observe, and describe, right? It isn't about just standing up and learning the terminology. For the pathway one, there are pieces in here, and this is the one I don't think you can kind of negotiate away. You do need to maybe grab some of these things from the kindergarten. And I didn't grab their whole presentation. I just grabbed the pieces that would be most relevant to you in grade 1. So we talked about the different types of motion in kindergarten. And this is why I say this isn't one you can kind of skip over, because they do need this. So again, up and down motion example could be a bouncing a ball. And I wouldn't do all these in one day. It's, maybe we can do some activities in the gym. We go for phys ed, we go outside in the playground. And what are some things that we can do for up and down motions and get some exercise at the same time? This is a great one to tie into phys ed and activities. Straight line motion, right? Or we walk down the hallways. Whenever we take them, we teach the little ones that they've got to walk either with their partner, hold their hand, or their hands behind them, and it's very quiet, nobody talks, and we walk in a straight line. So those are the ways that we can start to engage them into thinking about pathways that they use on a day-by-day basis. So this is about them physically, but then later in grade 1, we want them to also say, if I have an object, and let's say it's something that's really like a stuffy. Okay, they brought a stuffy. Today is our 100 day. Everybody gets to bring a stuffy. Let's see if we can get 100 stuffies. The stuffy might go really easily like a curling rock down the floor in the hallway, because the floor might be smooth. Okay, if you have linoleum in the floor and you've got a stuffy, it's going to go. Versus if you have some of those fake tiles and it's a little bit rough, it might not go as far, right? But that's a texture difference. And that's also part of your curriculum. Is how does what I put my object on get affected by what I'm trying to move it on? So a smooth surface versus a rough surface, or even what if I like riding my bike and I want to ride my bike in grass? Is it the same as when I ride it on the sidewalk? No, it's a little more challenging. So we have lots of activities that we can teach them the concept we want through the actions that they're about to do. And now that it's hopefully going to starting to get a little bit more warm outside, and we start to get that spring coming, we have those activities that we can do both inside and outside. Running around, right? They need to know what going around is. And so certainly a carousel would be one, but putting hula hoops down for activity in the gym and letting the kids run around that are doing an obstacle course where they have to do a figure 8, but that's going around so that they understand what that looks like. Same thing with sort of that zigzag motion. We suggested for kindergarten, take some chalk. Let's go outside and let's make some zigzags. And now maybe we walk on the zigzag, right? So it's very action oriented. But then 2, what do I have that I might see that goes in a zigzag motion? And that's where some of the games that we have might be good exemplars of that. I have some examples for that for you. Back and forth swinging would be one as well. So again, it's a very much an active. So when we talk about, you know, do the students, are they going to be passively learning this, or are they actually going to be engaged in it? And I would say this is one of those ones where they're going to be going, like they should be going, and they should be actively involved in what they're doing. And it could be as simple as this, you know, this is, if you watch it as an adult, forget the grade 1 context, what is this little guy signifying? And if you watch really carefully what he's doing, it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, right? That saying that we have, that's what it is. But it's just forward and backwards. So that's another way that we can see it, or going side to side, right? Just having something as simple as that. Can they take their stuffy and show you side to side, forward and backwards, right? And kids love their stuffies at this age. So what movement or pathway is happening? This again comes from the kindergarten. I'm not going to go through both of these. I'll just show you what's on a couple of them, and then you can go on from there. So there's 2 different slide decks here, and within each of those slide decks, you have some additional pictures. And what we want them to describe for us is, what is the pathway, the movement that was being modeled here? So they're throwing a ball, it's backwards and forwards, right? That's what we'd be looking at. Here I see the door opens and closes, backwards and forwards, or side to side, if that's the way I'm going to go, depending on where I look at it. I go up and down, I go up and down on the escalator. So is it a smooth up and down? Is it a rough up and down? Like, what does it feel? So there's lots of different examples that we can show students as we're teaching them these terminologies of pathways and all the pieces that go along with it. Okay, let's go into here. When we get into speed, this might be a nice place for them to do some real hands-on trials. And trialing as in, you might have in your school those marbles where they can build different tiers of them, and they have to drop the marble and watch it go around and get down to the bottom. And now I have the potential of having the marble run through a course in which it might slow down in places where it goes a little bit more uphill. It goes faster as it goes around a spiral. It goes through a hole, and then it drops down in a straight line and then goes. So there's lots of different things that we can do there. And what you're seeing here is just a sample. I won't go through. But all you're watching is a backyard that has taken a track and they've made it a marble drop. And they just want a Hot Wheels car is going through and just going through and following on this pathway. And the kids can watch it. But lots of boys in your classes now will have those little cars that they can try and build a track. And maybe that's their challenge at the end of this. Their transfer is, can they design their own track, maybe out of paper or out of cardboard, that might work for a little car? Or do we have a game that we could use that would give us that same kind of activity? So there's potential here for lots of hands-on, that's for sure.
Jog's track loves to go forwards, vroom, 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 and backwards, vroom, 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 vroom.
There are some books that I was able to find. These are from Pearson. And you probably or may already have these in your schools. They come from the SAIL series. They're not new. They are been around for schools for quite a while. But the one on speed sports that Jill wrote would be really appropriate for this particular grade and the organizing idea that we're unpacking, because it talks about what are the different surfaces that I can go on, and does a different surface and what the object is made of, does that make it go faster or slower, right? It's the same thing as the slide my stuffy down the hall versus it's on a tile versus it's on a carpet. Right? That's all going to be a different way that they move and what factors influence how I can move it. Here you have speedboats, right? And they have the smooth bottoms on them so that they can go the high speeds and skim across the top of the water. We also have opportunities like skating. A lot of your kids might be into skiing. How do they go fast down the hill? How do they get slowed down? If I have tons of extra snow, it pushes me and doesn't let me go as fast as it does if it's packed already. So again, we can just talk about, and if you know what the interests of your students are, then you can kind of zero in and use that to your benefit and just tailor your examples towards what the kids' encouragements are. There is a nice little chart that was in that book too, and it talks about what are some of the speeds that typically high speeds that can happen within each of these different activities. So if you do have that book in your school, that would be a great one to grab with this organizing idea. The other one that's from the sales series is the up and down. And that too talks about, I can go up and down, right? My motion of going on the skis, but then again, I see packed snow, I see loose snow. How does that slow me down? How does it speed me up? All of those different pieces. So then how do they move? Well, I did find one that actually fits perfectly for our organizing idea. So when we're talking about whether or not it slides, whether it bounces. So this is a video, and I won't go through and play the video, but it will demo for students. And this is what I would suggest we would do in the classroom. You could use the video as your demo, and you already have number of centers set up with a whole bunch of objects. And what we want to know is, does it slide? Does it bounce? Where would you put it, right? So giving them a whole bunch of ideas of the kinds of things that they might put in there. If you don't have a lot in the classroom, I did a couple of slides for you that have pictures on them, where you could use the picture as a talking point, or if you've got something like that in the school. But again, I was trying to pick things that they might see, and including even little stuffy toys that they might have had as young children, where the ball is made of fabric, not of plastic. So how does a fabric ball bounce, or does it? Does a fabric ball slide more so than a plastic ball does? Does it matter if both of these were placed on grass? How would that change? So you're combining both of the what it's made out of, what actions can that object do, versus what is by trying to do the action on. And so this is going to be very much a hands-on approach for the students, for them to describe what they've learned and for them to make some conclusions about whether things go fast or slow, and what are some things that might speed it up or slow it down, right? So again, you've just got a slide deck here of pictures that you're welcome to use. And they are not too early in their part of their thinking to start giving them a Venn diagram. It doesn't have to be super complicated, but I could put 2 hula hoops down on the floor. I could put the word slide in one and roll in the other, and give me a whole bunch of objects that you can find in the classroom, or let them go find. What objects did they find that can slide? And what objects did they find that could roll? And then we might say, wow, what do you think would fit in the middle here? So that would be our objects that roll and slide, right? And there are going to be definitely, take a soup can, for example, right? It can roll, but if it's on its flat surface, I can slide it just as well. So letting them just try it out. Don't give them any clues other than, and then at the end, once we talk about what are all the things that just fit in the slide side, and why did you know that they're sliding? How did you know that? What were you looking for? So we're looking for flat surfaces. A cone, for example, is going to slide on its bottom side, but it's definitely not going to slide on its round side. It will kind of go that round piece, but the point is going to stop me from having it turned upside down and sliding it. So it's having that conversation and for them to experience it, right? They need to just go and try it out, not for us to necessarily tell them what it is. You remember that bouncing is your other one. So you might want to go, does it slide and does it bounce, or does it roll and does it bounce? Or, you know, you might even say, as a group, we're going to put a third hula hoop down, and that's the bounce. And is there anything that we found that can slide and roll and bounce at the same time? And that might just sit in the middle. So there might be one that we do together as a group. So again, we talk about the surfaces, right? How does the surface make a difference? So here's my slide, bounce, and roll. And then what are some surfaces that can change the aspect of it? What slows it down? What speeds it up? So if I'm on my bike, it's fast for me. I can go in springtime. I'm excited to go ride my bike. I can ride it on the sidewalk really, really fast. But man, when I hit some really tall grass, it's going to make me work harder, and I'm not going to go quite as quickly. So we want them to have real examples that they experience. So again, you've got some videos here that you could use, objects that can slide, and these would be things that they could probably find in the classroom or home. Maybe we send them home and say, tomorrow I want you to bring with you a toy or something from home that can slide, another one that can roll, another one that can bounce, and then explore them and see maybe they fit into more than one category. So having that chart similar to the one that Ted showed you would be a good example that you could use for them for your checklist, right? Where does it fit? So here would be my transfer suggestion to you. In this video here, I'm just going to go to this one for a second. This is an activity in which the suggestion is, let's do a STEM activity. Now that I've tried all these different things out, can they make their own little pathway, curved, straight on it? Maybe it has a place where it gets slowed down, whatever. And they give you a sample here to show them, but that could just be for you, or you give them the tools that you want them to use. Much like a science fair, you know, when we bring all the kids together in a gym, we say, here are the items that your group has. That's all you get. Now, what can you do? Can you make something that works? So could they take a little toy or something that they have? Can they make a small ball, a ping pong ball or something, roll down this? Or do you have these discovery toys where they fill the marbles in there? Can they make something like that? And can they make it go around? And can they make it go through a winding path and a straight path? And is there a place where it goes down, right? So this is an opportunity for them to condense all three of those together. And then they can put it into, let's say this. And if you use a little rubber ball, then the final drop doesn't bounce, right? That could be another conclusion that you have or that you're looking for them to do. There's so many different ones that you can do here, but I will be honest with you. Another one that you might have, and you might even have it in the school, is Mousetrap, right? The game Mousetrap, when they build through the game, they're building this path, and the path has zigzags in it. It has places where the ball goes over, it has to drop down, and then all these things are happening. That's a great one for them to talk about pathways before, after, moving up and down. Like those are the sort of an ideal kind of game that you might want to bring in. And then you don't have to play the whole game, maybe set the whole Mousetrap up, and then how do we get it to go? Like, what do we have to do? So it is a short little unit, and yet it could be super, super fun for them as far as activities are concerned, and quite engaging. So I think that the potential for them to walk away with, I like the idea of having a STEM activity at the end where they have to create something that mimics either all of the different pathways and motions that we talked about, or they target one and they're explaining to you which one it is that they have demonstrated through the design that they've created. So that would be kind of an opportunity for us to do the transfer piece at the end. So that's kind of a suggestion, and that's all it is, just a way that maybe we could unpack some of the things that are happening in that last organizing idea that we are working on. So that takes us, let me get out of this one here. That takes us to the end of our last session with you for this grade. So thank you so much, everyone, for being with us. If there are any questions, just unmute yourself and throw away, or if you've got ideas of stuff that you've already done and that worked so well with the kids, this is a great time to share that with your colleagues. But we do thank you so much for always being with us. And please do, as Ted said, watch for the next sessions that come up. We will have these videos still there, but we will add to those so that we have some newness as well. So I'm not sure that's necessary for you to go through every one of those sessions, but you might want to keep an eye on it. Or if you didn't join us for all of them, come to the ones that you missed, but you would just keep an eye on anything that's new that's been posted in there as well. Are there any questions? All right, so we will post the video recording as well as all the slide decks that you're seeing here. We'll put those all into the folder, and we'll hopefully get Jordan to upload them by tomorrow morning, and then you'll have access to them.
1 second, Chris.
Yeah, for sure.
We did get a comment from Tracy, just just wanting to have the organizing idea, have lots of experiments in it, because that's what kids do, like the hands-on thing. I think your example really brought out a lot of experiments and hands-on things that could happen for sure with this. So Tracy, if you can keep in mind those things. But I also want to mention one thing that's a bit problematic, maybe, at least from my perspective, with the skills procedures, that if it doesn't say experiment or investigate, we kind of feel like we can't. And I think we have license to do those things because wherever it says observe and record, remember that's all part of an investigation or an experiment process. So, if you can take any of these things with movement, say, let's make a prediction. What do you think is going to happen here? How can we figure this out by making the things that you made and the suggestions you did, Chris? Then we could do those observations and so on. So even though the org or the skills and procedures says observe, it could be part of a bigger investigation because observing is part of that. So I think wherever you can put experiments and investigations in to use any of those things, we should have license to do that, not only where it says so in the skills and procedures.
And I see there's a question in there about where to find these. So let me just put this into the chat box for you right now. Just make sure I didn't make a spelling mistake there. Okay, if you want to grab, oh, come on. All right, why are you not letting me do that? Okay, Ted, can you go into the chat box and put the moving forward curriculum.ca?
Do that right now.
You. So if you go to the moving forward curriculum.ca, you will find that that is where we're going to locate all of the pieces. So most of you, I'm sure, have been there already once before. If not, there's a blue box there that allows you, I don't know why mine is frozen here, but it allows you to go in and sign up on your own. So you don't need anybody to do that for you or send your email to us. And once you go there, just go into the subject area that's in the black box and find science. And that's where we have posted all the science resources for every organizing idea that we did and all the different grades. And you are grade 1 teachers, but that doesn't mean you don't have access to all of the materials. So you have access to every grade, kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, and so on, okay? Any other questions?
I'm just making sure the comments or the messages, the chat's done. Yeah, I think so. So Kat, you should have that access to those files now. If you don't, email Chris or myself and we'll help you out, okay? Or stick on at the end of the line here. We'll make sure you can do that. So if you can get them now, let us know. If not, we'll stick around and help you do that.